I'm such a big fan of this film, and it on the surface level, you can just enjoy it for the adventure, but the themes underneath, the fact that we need to trust one another and work together as a whole in order to thrive, is such a powerful theme. When did you guys arrive to that notion that trust and working together was the thrust of the story?
From the very, very beginning of its conception, Raya was this story about people from different ideologies having to come together and coexist. And I think that was always at the core of the movie. But being able to focus it so sharply on trust, it happened deep into production as we were starting to put scenes and see storyboards together and realize that that was sort of like the ingredient. We knew that we wanted them to come together. We knew that people needed to sort of like discover something that was stronger than them, that was bigger and greater than them, in order to put all of their difference aside. And when this idea of trust just sort of like came up, that became sort of like the ingredient, and it allowed us to really be specific about what was needed from each of these characters in order for them to sort of like let go of their preconceived notions of the other and really be able to work with each other. So trust sort of like became the key that unlocked all of the doors for us, and then we came up with these sort of like two ideologies that really move all of our characters forward. And one is, in a broken world, you can't trust anyone, and that's when Raya starts her journey as an adult. This is sort of like her guiding principle, just thinking that things are way too messed up, and it's like everyone for themselves. And then Sisu comes in with this opposing ideology, which is the world is broken because you don't trust anyone. So those sort of like become the two conflicting ideologies, and Raya sort of like slowly making her way into being able to, again, sort of like trust in someone and ultimately tested at the end by Sisu.
But you create a triangle where you have three powerful female figures, where one is trust, the other one is mistrust, and then you have Sisu that basically says, guys, we need to get along. When did that dynamic of having three powerful female leads and almost, as I mentioned, a triangle come about?
I mean, I really do think that the movie from day one was constructed with these three main characters, and knowing that Raya and Sisu were going to be the leading relationship, and knowing that Namari and Raya were also going to be sort of like, even though they're much more layered than calling someone like a hero and a villain, we knew that the main conflict was going to come from those two. And specifically because Fang, out of all the lands of Kumandra, is sort of like the most formidable and the most rigid, and Heart sort of like being they're the heart of the dragon, so being a little bit more sort of like spiritual and grounded, and just trying to see how those two very seemingly different cultures could come together and say, like, look, even though on the surface we may have so little in common, really there is something greater than us putting us together. So we knew that it was going to be essentially Raya and Namari on the opposite ends of the spectrum, and then Sisu becoming the bridge between one and the other. So Sisu being sort of like the glue. I mean, quite literally, you see it in the dragon gem that used to be one whole piece. Early in the movie, it breaks into 5 pieces, and Sisu becomes the glue that essentially puts them all together, and Raya is the one who has to actually physicalize that. So it's there's a lot of symbology, there's a lot of real deep thought that went into the design of the movie, the design of the story, the making of each character, to make sure that we can sort of like communicate all these ideas as clearly as possible. So
you break so much new ground in this film that is a Disney film. We're used to seeing a villain that we despise, and we cannot wait to have her or his comeuppance. And Namari, you alluded to the fact that she's very complex. It's somebody who we root for, but at the same time don't like some of her choices. And eventually she shows that she's a very nuanced character. You know, can you tell us about that?
That was something that was very important for us from day one is the fact that no one in the movie is wrong. There's really no right or wrong here. There's really just a lot of layers of complication, and everyone is really, this is a broken world, and there's a world that is under a great threat. So they're each really doing what they have to do to survive and to give good lives to their people. So even though Namari is sort of like presented as this antagonist, when you get to learn a little bit more about Fang, when she's young and talking to Raya, she talks about how they're struggling, how she hasn't had rice in a long time, how even though Fang has this reputation for being formidable, they're going through tough times. And same thing when you go into Tail and when you go into Talon, you see that they may have sort of like a reputation for being con artists and thieves, Little Noir representing them. But you get to scratch a little bit beyond the surface, and you get to see that they're robbing each other because they're struggling, because they don't have food. Little Noir doesn't have a family, doesn't have anyone to cook for her, has been raised by this family of Ongis. So when you try to sort of like understand each of these very different perspectives, it's like no one's really wrong. Everyone's trying to do the best that they can with what they're given. And that's ultimately what we found so interesting about exploring these characters, that it's really, if this became Namari's movie, she would have a very similar arc from Raya's. It's her and her family went through some really difficult moments and are essentially just surviving and trying to stay alive. And there's these other people that are getting in the way. So it became really interesting, really complicated, and really wonderful to try to give each of our characters and each of our lands real personality that was nuanced, that was layered, that was complex, and making sure that Namari never became like our classic mustache twirling villain, that she had real human needs, that she had to protect her mother, protect her people, and it was really just a matter of how the pieces landed and the fact that Raya had similar reasons. So anyway, for all these reasons, I think that putting this story together was so challenging, and it was a really beautiful experience because it forced us really to play this like game of empathy and just say, like, people who on the surface may be directly opposed to us, or people who on the surface we would never seem to connect, or there would be no way that we would ever need to coexist. Like, what would it take for us to extend our hand and to say, I want to work with you. I understand that we have very different perspectives, but there's a greater thing here that is at stake, and we believe that it's worth doing the work to bridge that gap. So anyway,
That was beautiful.
yeah, we thought a lot about this story, and we're honestly so happy with how it came together.
When I introduced the film, I mentioned that there's 5, and you alluded to it, that there's 5 distinct worlds in this film, and it could have been 5. It's almost as if you've done 5 different films. Each land, whether it's Tail, whether it's where we got Fang. Tell us about creating each particular world.
The world of Raya is incredibly vast and so complex. And I remember as we were finishing the movie, we were just saying it's a shame that the movie gets to see so little of it, because our art and our production design team really constructed 5 distinct, incredibly rich and diverse worlds, and it was such. I mean, I'm new to Disney animation. I was there not very long before I joined Raya, and it was a discovery process. But seeing the amount of research and work and love that goes into all of these decisions was was really mind-blowing. In creating these 5 lands, we had sort of like this like 5 land document that went into design conceits, that went into fabrics, obviously into colors. I think that those are like the more recognizable elements, but sometimes went into like footwear, we went into traditions, we went into like how people would move and communicate, we went into modes of transportation, um, like typeface, and if you see any written stuff, like how one would vary it from the other. Obviously the characters, like we just there it was really like trying to create 5 different movies and then putting them all together and trying to, because that's really what the film is about, right? Like how these 5 very distinct worlds finding the common threads. So the amount of work put in with the story department, with our production design department, and even went down into like the music and sound, it was incredible. I've never seen anything like it, and I I hope that people really feel themselves submerged in this world of Kamandra, because that was really the intention, to create something that was so wholly original, and that even though it's an epic film, even though it's sort of like on the surface it may sound like something you have seen often, we put so much thought into making sure that the detail and that all the layers existed, so that it really did feel like an experience that was so fully original.
Also, when I introduced the film, I mentioned that it was the first time that we had a Southeast Asian heroine in the film. But, you know, circling back to Kumandra, yes, it's a fantasy world, but it's rooted in Southeast Asia, and you must have gone through a lot of research about the different Southeast Asia cultures, which are represented in the different regions, correct?
Yeah, it was incredible. I mean, being at Disney Animation right now has been really exciting for me, just because I think that the amount of time, energy, thought, and love that is being put into creating these movies is just really rewarding. And with Raya specifically, the amount of research that went into this, the amount of consultants that came with us, the amount of sort of like responsibility that went into putting this world together, that was influenced by the cultures of Southeast Asia. I mean, for me, I learned so much, and I can't really imagine making a movie without this much care and effort placed into sort of like the cultural aspect of it. We had this group of people called the Southeast Asian Story Trust, and it was made out of people from the region who were, some of them were anthropologists, some of them were sociologists, architects, dancers, musicians, and they were on from day one. I mean, even before Raya was officially a movie, they were already consulting in helping us pull inspiration, talking to our artists. There were a trip that was a couple of trips our artists took to different countries in Southeast Asia to like really immerse themselves in these worlds. And then these people that we sort of like collected through the journey really stuck around until now, and they were there when the first versions of the script were being written. They were there when the characters were being designed, when the worlds were being designed. They were giving feedback on buildings and architecture and clothes and storylines. And even as the movie was being done, I mean, obviously music, but even as the movie was being done, just in terms of how we could have conversations with the many communities that inspired the movie. So it really felt like having these intimate collaborative relationship with people from the cultures, from the region, in addition to the people from our own team that belong to these cultures, that I feel like were just so instrumental in the creating of this world. So it really wasn't sort of like, there was so much thought that went into each of these decisions, and it was really sort of like community building process, how this whole thing came together. So I don't know, I'm just so happy that so many people understood the importance that sort of like making the first Disney movie inspired in the cultures by Southeast Asia, the first time that we have a Southeast Asian heroine on the screen. Like it felt like we were doing it for the right reasons and we were doing it the right way, and we're so happy to see it.
On that thought, I'm a big fan of Southeast Asia, and I've recently been to Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and I was always struck by the way they salute one another. Although they're different cultures, they always put their hand on their chest when they salute one another, and you found an equivalent where they salute each other with the circle. Can you talk about the genesis of that?
Yeah, I mean that's just one of many examples of, I think we knew from early on how the message that we wanted to leave with people, but I feel like in the research trips, and all of our artists would say this, the one thing that we walked away from was knowing that even though there was such different, distinct, and beautiful cultures in Southeast Asia, there was sort of like this unifying factor that brought them all together, and it was sort of like this unspoken sort of like larger community that exists in that region. That's really what we wanted to represent in the movie. The signal that you're talking about was something that we wanted to do from very early on, because we wanted to create sort of like something that was original and unique to sort of like the Namaste sign, and that became sort of like the sign of the dragon. It represents the dragon gem. It's something that all of them have in common. When Kumandra was thriving and when there was unity in the land, that was sort of like the way of greeting each other. That was also the way to show respect for a dragon. Every time that they're in a temple, they would do it. Every time they would say hi, every time they would seek it, sort of like be in the presence of an older presence. And that sort of like just became another one of these images that we just kept coming back to, because it represented sort of like this time when there was unity in the land. And that is what it really sort of like bookends our movie. Like you see it early on, you see all the people doing it to the dragons when they still were around, and then you see them all doing it at the end when they're together at Benja's doorstep. So we really tried to fill the movie with so much symbology and so much meaning that I feel like there's so many layers of like little and big details that we try to sprinkle in there.
You mentioned the dragons. Us in Western culture, we think of dragons, fire, destruction, war, and you introduced dragons here that are all about life and unity and water, which is actually the Eastern belief, which is different. We're not aware of dragons being used in that vein. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So our dragon was very much influenced by the Southeast Asian mythology of the Naga, which is a water dragon that is connected to life, that represents unity, that represents sort of like this really meaningful relationship, divine relationship between dragons and humans. And that's really what started the whole movie. We really wanted for our main character to have a relationship with Sisu that was so different from the kinds of relationships that we're used to when we think about dragons. Specifically, in the Western world, we have this idea of dragons being the sort of like threatening force that is usually meant to sort of like protect some kind of treasure or some sort of like important. It's this very, very particular image that I was raised with, and when the more that we got to learn about the Naga, the more that we learned to know about what it meant for Southeast Asian people, we realized that we had this opportunity to do something that people really hadn't seen, to introduce a character that we had never seen on a movie like this, and then to also create a relationship that was really intimate, really beautiful, and really tender between our main character and Sisu. And that's really what we tried to do. Like, nothing about Sisu is meant to be intimidating or threatening or aggressive. It's the opposite. She represents unity. She represents harmony. And that just felt like such a beautiful place to start. and Sisu just ended up becoming this incredible character that I think we just all fell completely in love with.
The film is highly cinematic. It's like unlike any other Disney film before. Can you tell us about your approach? It's specifically the camera work. The scenes when they're all about trust, you use wider lenses. When it's scenes about mistrust, you use longer lenses. There is all this wonderful lighting being used throughout the film. Can you talk to us about your approach?
Yeah, I mean, we really wanted to push the boundary of what a Disney movie could feel like, what a Disney movie could look like, and just animated movies as a whole. I think we were just so excited about utilizing live action techniques and really making this feel like hyper realistic, still with sort of like a very much an animated heart, but trying to see how we could really push boundaries and take this into places that we at least hadn't seen in animated movies. So this goes, I mean, definitely the lighting, definitely the camera work. We used film grain in a way that, the people that we were working with said we had never seen this on an animated movie before. And I remember we were finishing the movie and they were asking us, "Hey, is this too much? Are you sure you want to go this far?" And that was always sort of like an invitation for us to be like, let's just push it as much as we can. So a great deal of thought went into the cinematography, into the look, into the design, and the rendering of each image. And our cinematography team, in addition to being just fantastic technicians and fantastic creative people, they are also really, really good storytellers, and they really raise the bar in terms of how cinematography can be used in an animated movie. They put so much thought into, as you were mentioning, into the lens choices, into the framing, into the camera movement, so that throughout every step of the journey, you would be able to, the cinematography would evolve with the story. And using sort of like trust as our key motif, you would see that earlier in the film, or we would represent like both of the trust and the distrust with different cinematic choices. So for example, the most clear example is the scene when Raya and Sisu are sitting on the boat on their way to Spine. And that's when they both share their philosophies of Raya saying, the world is broken, you can't trust anyone. Sisu saying, the world is broken because you don't trust anyone. And if you can rewatch it later on Disney Plus, but if you see, every shot that shows Raya is framed with a wider lens. You see all of the background in sharp focus. They're going through this sort of like part of the river that has lots of like broken down wood in the background. It's very sharp and very jagged. And then you cut to the Sisu shots, and they have longer lenses with bokeh effect in the background. You see sort of like she's backlit with you see the glimmer of the sun in the background. It's soft and it's sort of like intimate and really beautiful. And it really just visually, without having to use words, it just shows you how different of a place they are in sort of like their journey. And like that, the entire movie is filled with so many creative choices that really sort of like amplify the thematics and the journeys of the characters. So there's layers upon layers upon layers about when a character looks straight into the camera, when Sisu's connecting with Namari, looking straight into each other, versus like the shots that we used earlier on that are more detached and a little bit more objective. So I'm glad you caught it.
Yeah, no, and we can go even, like, I can go on for days because that's the things that I was just so blown away. Like, and pardon me about not knowing the names of the cities, but when you go to Fang, the color choices is all like black and reds, and things are sharper, right?
Yeah.
Like things are
Yeah.
angular. When you get to tell, things are like mustard colors,
Yes.
and things are the city where is water. Things are more rounded visually.
Yeah, no, that's 100% right. Yeah.
Yeah, the fact that you're able, and I mentioned to you that I teach, and I tell my students is that the content of the film should drive the choices that are made. And what's fantastic about this film is that you can watch it and just analyze the background, and you actually understand what the theme of the movie and what you're trying to drive at.
Yeah, I mean that's something that I think our team was just so masterful at, just making sure that every creative choice that we were making supported the story, the themes, and the character journeys that we're after. So as you mentioned, it's like it's in the design choices, it's in the architecture, it's in the colors, it's in the music. So yeah, Fang looks very different from Talon, and Talon is a market that is bustling, that is struggling financially, that where characters make do with what they have. So the materials that you see in Talon are all sort of like earthy and organic, and it's like lots of wood and lots of sort of like repurposed materials. And you go to Fang, and it's these like concrete-like structures that are all very, very sort of like well designed and mathematical and symmetrical, and sort of like a lot more like brutalist in style. And like that, I think the more you scratch, you'll keep seeing like in the colors that people are wearing. You'll see in it was endlessly inspiring to see how every department just took it as a challenge to see how I can plus to what we as filmmakers were trying to do with our story. And every time that we would have a meeting and they would come in to show us stuff, it wasn't just like, hey, here's a design, here's a cool shirt for this character. No, it was like based on our 4 years of research, and based on these conversations that we had with our cultural consultants, and based on the character psychology, and based on this sort of like breakdown of trust that we have been building through development. Here is a design that is going to like represent all of these ideas, and it's going to be very helpful because it's going to show that Raya is in this place, and it's going to show like that level of thought and intricacy that goes into every decision. And it's just like the most inspiring way to create as a filmmaker.
Tell us about the development of Tuk Tuk, who it's such a great character. And for those who travel in Southeast Asia, Tuk Tuk is a 3-wheel vehicle that transports you. But this is a pug, and it's a vehicle, and it's also a snail.
I mean, I think that's a really good example of how an idea sort of like evolves into what you ended up seeing. Like this was during the research trips that our artists took, specifically in Thailand. There's these small
Tuk-tuks.
motorized vehicles that people refer to as tuk-tuks, and they're just so peculiar, and they're everywhere, and they're noisy, and they're just cute. Even just the name of how people refer to them, it's just so endearing, and it just stuck with all of our artists. And then earlier in the development process, we were like, okay, so Raya is going to go on this journey across the land, so she's likely going to need a mode of transportation. So in brainstorming, all right, well, let's pull inspiration from the trip. Let's see how our artists sort of like interpret it and make it something that's unique in ours, and then the tradition of sort of like Disney storytelling and great animal sidekicks. This idea of like a pill bug, this fantasy animal that would be her sidekick, but also her form of transportation. And then it started as like a small little pill bug, and then it sort of like evolved into a pill bug crossed with a bear, crossed with a giant dog. And then we introduced sort of like all of our Kumandra assets, and this was a pill bug from Tail, so it had like a harder shell, and you start seeing it small, but then it's large, and like how it just like grew and grew and grew through so many iterations, and then we ended up with the character that you just saw on the screen. So that's just one little idea of how a question of like all right, we need to take Raya from A to B, and how do we do this in a way that is unique and inspired by the cultures that we're drawing inspiration from, and how can we make it like just so undeniably like memorable and charming and beautiful, and that's how Tuk
And
Tuk's
I have to ask you about the voices and the actors that portray the leads. Let's start with Kelly Marie Tran, who's phenomenal as Raya. Tell us about working.
I mean,
with-
our entire cast, we just feel so lucky to have been able to work with everyone that we worked with. The movie meant a lot to us. When we first started working on it, the themes of the movie felt so timely and so important. But then as time started passing and as 2020 came, they just started taking on this whole other meaning.
And you made the film during COVID.
I mean, we started it before and we finished it during, but it was COVID. It was the social unrest. It was like everything was going in the country election wise, and this like really divided, sort of like world that we live in right now. And every one of the themes of the movie just started to feel more and more necessary. And I think that for us as filmmakers, that filled our days with purpose, and we felt like we were contributing something that was positive and that was necessary for the discourse. But I feel like the actors also took on that responsibility wholeheartedly, and every single actor who came on to the movie just had this connection with it that I don't think any of us had ever experienced. I remember we meet them at first and we talk to them a little bit about the themes and the characters and sort of like where the story is going, and each of these just turned into these really beautiful conversations where all of them were just like opening up about what it meant to them to be in this movie, to represent sort of like these ideas. I remember talking to Sandra Oh, who plays Namari's mom, and just saying like, whoa, this hits close to home, and just the fact that even though she's seen as the antagonist, she has like real profound reasons for acting the way she does and for wanting to like save her people, and how like people would go to any extent to do that. So anyway, every single character, every single actor who came on had this like incredibly beautiful connection to their characters. Kelly essentially is Raya, and I remember meeting her on our first recording session, and we like encourage actors to, we have a script and they read the script, but we really encourage actors to build the characters with us. And because it's not really like they come in and they record and then we don't see them again, it's like Kelly we must have seen through like a year and a half, like at least a handful of times a month, and she would come back and we would show her progress with our designs and our sequences, and then she would have ideas that she would incorporate into her recording sessions, and then that would influence the artist back in the studio. So there's this real creative relationship between the crew and the project, and then what the actors bring on. So I remember Kelly did that first session, and the scene where she's like making this offering to Sisu, and that eventually brings Sisu back. That was a few lines in the script, and when we had Kelly in the booth, we said, look, let's do it as scripted once, and then let us know if you have any thoughts on like how would you do it and what does this mean to you. And Kelly went to this really personal place, and she improvised almost the entire scene. Like what you see on screen was mostly just straight out of Kelly. And she had us all in tears, and she said, look, I'm in a complicated spiritual place, and if I were to talk to a deity, like I would probably have a lot of doubt, and I wouldn't, I would say something like, I don't know if you can hear me, I don't know if you're even real, but I still have this thing that I believe. And she brought that into the scene, and that's what really stayed. And then we brought it to our animators, and they animated that incredibly beautiful, like intimate moment. So anyway, that just shows you a little bit of the relationship that we have with the actors and the impact that their work has on the film.
And Carlos, you made this film during COVID, and your whole film is about trust and unity, and you have people working from their homes doing the special effects and animation and doing voiceover, etc. How did that situation that you were under of COVID and the pandemic affect the film ultimately?
I mean, in every way, we had to. I think we had animated maybe 2 scenes before we had to all go home and figure out how to work. I mean, over 500 people got to work on this movie, so it was made in over 500 homes, and I think it was quite poetic. We realized quickly that we had to put sort of like all of the ideas of the movie into practice as we were making this. Like, we were working from so many, I mean, literally divided physically by not being able to ever be together, but having to trust that we were working after the same objective, and having to empower people to say, like, look, we trust that you know what we're doing here, and you're going to be doing it as you're going through this very, very difficult time, and you're going to be doing it from home, and we believe in this movie, and it's going to be hard to make, and we don't really know how it's going to come together, but we believe that it's the right thing to do, and everyone had that same sort of like mentality. And I remember one of the most rewarding moments of the entire process of making the movie was when we were wrapping. We usually all like when you're in the studio, you have all the people who you start wrapping, so like different departments. So this is the last shot that is animated. This is the last shot that goes through lighting, and then you do like a big like just like sign of gratitude to the artists that are leaving. And digitally, we had to do it all over Zoom. So we essentially just got the whole departments together. We told them how thankful we were for their work, and then just they would each share some words with us. And we anticipated that this would have been probably like one of the worst experiences, because they didn't get to see anyone. We were going through all this like really, really difficult stuff at home. Technically, it was challenging, and one by one, all of our artists would sort of like share some words with us, and they would say, I have never felt more a part of a team. I've never felt more like people really were valuing my work, were valuing my perspective, that had my best interest in mind. And we realized that the way that like all this madness brought us together was really, really unique, and people just said, this is my favorite experience that I've had working at Disney. This is my favorite experience that I've had working in animation, like beyond. And I'm gonna take this experience like with me to the grave. And that was just such an incredible thing to hear when we anticipated. We expected that it would be the opposite, but I think that it really brought us together in a way that nothing else would have. And we made a movie that we're all very proud of.
Well, you should be, and thank you so much for being here, Carlos. But it's not goodbye, because we're all going to join you for a reception.
Yes.
Right after. But thank you for being here.
Thank you for coming to watch it. Much appreciated.